Good evening. Good evening and welcome. I'm Joe O'Keefe. I'm the Dean of the Lynch School of Education, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the 6th Annual Lynch School Symposium. Tonight, I think we have a particularly important topic related to the educational attainment of the largest growing demographic group in the United States, the Latino community. And certainly the notion that it is of utmost importance to provide educational opportunities for immigrants, for people who don't come from legacies of generations of wealth. That important value of education is something that is so appropriate for this university, which was founded to provide educational opportunities for immigrants and for people who weren't from highly educated families. It is certainly a value that motivates the work of all of us in the Lynch School, that motivates the work of those of us who are preparing teachers for pre-K through 12 work, providing the foundation for higher education. It certainly motivates our psychologists who look at the new demographics of our nation, who look at issues related to family structures and community structures, how people understand themselves and their identity, how groups can work together more effectively. Certainly it is also the work of the people who study research methods and evaluation and assessment. I think in so many ways when historians look back at this era in education, they will say it was all about tests. And this testing focus certainly has a major impact on all of our populations, and especially on our populations who come, for example, from homes where English is not the first language. It certainly is a primary interest of those of us who prepare people for leadership in educational settings, from pre-K through 12, principals and administrators who must take special responsibility to make sure that their schools provide opportunities for everyone. And certainly it is a great interest of those of us who work in higher education administration, policy, and research about higher education itself in the nation at the turn of in this new century, and how we can create colleges and universities that provide top flight education that prepare people to live not only strong professional lives, but to be productive and engaged citizens, to build up the common good, which is really the goal of education. Tonight we have a wonderful panel, eminently qualified to help us think more about these crucial issues. And I want to take a moment to introduce our panelists to you. Our keynote speaker this evening is Sarah Martinez Tucker, a member of the class of 2005 at Boston College. Dr. Martinez Tucker received her honorary doctorate in May here at Boston College, and so we are delighted to welcome her back to Alma Mater. She's been here for the day. We had a wonderful lunch with some undergrads, a great 2-hour conversation, and it is just a delight to have her here. Last year when she came, the evening before commencement, the honorary degree recipients have the opportunity to speak to a group of trustees and benefactors, and I was so impressed by how articulate and penetrating her words were that I immediately knew that I wanted her to come back to campus to give a much broader audience the opportunity to listen to her wisdom. Sarah Martinez Tucker has headed the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, the nation's leading organization supporting Hispanic higher education, since 1997. During her tenure, in which she has developed several strategic partnerships, the Scholarship Fund has increased its awards from $3 million a year to nearly $30 million a year. Time magazine earlier this year named Sarah Martinez Tucker one of the nation's 25 most influential Hispanics. And in September, Margaret Spellings, the U.S. Secretary of Education, named her to a 19-member commission to devise a comprehensive national strategy on the future of U.S. higher education. Prior to joining the Hispanic Scholarship Fund as president and CEO, she spent 16 years at AT&T and was the first Hispanic female to reach the company's executive level. In her last assignment at the company, she served as regional vice president for AT&T's global business communication systems. Among many honors earned throughout her career, Martinez Tucker was named the 2000 Hispanic of the Year by Hispanic Magazine and one of America's top 80 elite Hispanic women by Hispanic Business Magazine in 2003. Martinez Tucker is a founding member of the National Center for Educational Accountability, a joint venture of the nonprofit organization Just for the Kids, the University of Texas at Austin, and the Education Commission of the States. In 2001, she was appointed to the board of directors of the Student Loan Marketing Association, otherwise known as Sallie Mae. She's a member of the steering committee of the Council for Aid to Education and is on the advisory board for the Oxygen Media Markle Foundation venture. So I am just delighted, and I'm sure I join all of you in a warm welcome to Sarah Martinez Tucker back to Boston College. Sarah Martinez Tucker will speak for about 20 minutes, and then two of our eminent faculty will respond and share some of their thoughts about this issue of educational attainment among Latinos. The first speaker is Professor Maria Estela Brisk of our teacher education, curriculum instruction, teacher education, and special education department. She has been here for, and starting her 7th year, I think, is it? 6th year here at Boston College, and has really made tremendous contributions to this campus. Her research interest is in the area of bilingualism, bilingual education, literacy development, and methods of teaching literacy. And certainly she has a stunning array of publications and is a major force in bringing to light crucial issues related to children who come from non-English speaking backgrounds and the importance of the kind of structures of school, curriculum, and instruction that can best serve them and build up society. So I am delighted that she will be sharing her thoughts with us tonight. Of course, when we look at education of any group, I think it is foolish simply to segment into one sector of education or one level of education. And so Maria's work certainly on the pre-K through 12 level, the focus on some elementary school and the work she's doing in Boston here, needs to be complemented by someone who focuses her energies and efforts in looking at higher education. We need to see it as a totality. So I am delighted that our second speaker this evening is Ana Martinez Alaman, who is an associate professor in our program in higher education. Her interest certainly is in issues related to the impact of race, culture, and gender on college teaching and learning. She works in feminist theory and pedagogy, in cross-cultural studies, and in the philosophy and theory of higher education. So without further ado, let us get to the exciting program that awaits us. And again, after about 35 minutes or so, you can see there are 2 microphones set up. And when I spoke to Sarah about this session, she insisted that it be interactive by nature. So certainly we welcome your comments, your questions, and we look forward, all of us, to being much more reflective after this evening's symposium about this crucial issue. So thank you for your willingness to be here, and delighted that you'll be speaking with us this evening.
Thank you, Joe, very much. I've had an incredible day at Boston College. As Joe said, I started with some students, and we had a wonderful conversation around identity and what it means to be a Latina, and when it is you're comfortable as a Latina. And then I had great meetings, as you would expect at Boston College, struggling with more Latinos in theology, more Latinos in the priesthood, and then more Latinos in faculty. And then just a nice dinner where we got to all talk about the joy of being a Hispanic in the United States of America and what that means. And what we discovered was there really is nothing homogeneous about us, but there is a lot of passionate debate. And so I want to echo what Joe said, which is I'm hoping that we can keep our remarks to a very short time frame, and that the joy of our conversation will be in the discovery from the Q&A. I will tell you, though, I'm a little intimidated. When I was on the plane this morning from New York up here, I remembered again why I'm in the not-for-profit world and a retiree of the corporate world, not in academia. I reread Joe's letter, and he had said it would be nice to have a paper that we could study in advance and then have conversation around. And I'm going to let you know now, that what I bring to you is two perspectives. Number one, I'm hoping that I can, through life, become a better advocate and a better voice for Latino students and Latino parents in what they're experiencing today. So much of what I'm going to tell you is very anecdotal, based on the time I spend with kids and with parents in my community. The second caveat I'm going to say is I am a retiree from an engineering company, and the motto at AT&T was, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And I mean no disrespect to that. So we do research here, but our research is very pragmatic. So to the extent that you are academic and just steeped into it, be patient with me as I speak in broad terms, and hopefully in the Q&A we can get to some specifics. Let me begin by thanking you. I mentioned to Joe and I mentioned to my fellow panelists, every once in a while I'm lucky enough to spend time on a campus, and I'm so grateful to see some of the students that I met with earlier today. But Anna from OLA was asking me today, how many campuses do you visit a year? And I said, on a good year I get to be at 25 to 30 campuses, and for me that's a really small number, because I have scholarship recipients at 1,700 campuses across the United States. And so I'm thinking that I'm really narrow by only spending time on 25 to 30 campuses per year. And she said, wow, I get to visit maybe 1 or 2 campuses a year. So I am so grateful that in the time I spend with campuses, many times when we talk about Latino education or educating diverse cultures or diverse populations, the audience tends to be very similar to me. And I'm so grateful that the audience tonight is as diverse as you are, because that tells me that I'm hoping we can have a great dialogue. The second thing is, for those of you that were with me earlier today, thank you for coming to see me tonight. You're probably going to hear a lot of the same things over and over, but to the extent that I forget something, ask it in a question and I'll remember to say it. Let me talk a little bit about my concluding remarks when I was with the students earlier today. And we talked about the issue of identity and the issue of working Hispanic higher education. It is the greatest joy in my life that I get to wake up every day and decide, what can I do today to make a college education possible for a Latino student? It is the greatest frustration to me, and it makes me really cranky, that we have not been able to make Hispanic higher education a national agenda item. And so the message that I have for you tonight comes from those two perspectives. You're going to sense a lot of passion and a lot of joy and a lot of pride for the students I represent, the families I represent, but a lot of frustration on why we haven't been able to create national traction. I think it is the singular most important thing that all of us as Americans have to discuss today. And the reason I say that is we're the fastest growing segment of the American population and the most undereducated. If you look at the K through 12 pipeline, in 2002, Latinos represented 17% of that student population. By 2010, we'll be 25%. We have the lowest proficiency in math and science and the highest dropout rate before the 10th grade. We're 17% of the population and 50% of the dropouts. What does that translate to for higher education? Only half of our kids are graduating from high school. Only a third of high school graduates are enrolling in college. And ultimately, roughly 10% of Latino adults have a college education. I sit back in the work that I do, and I think, what does this mean for a stronger America? When you have the fastest growing segment of the American population exist as the most undereducated, what does that translate to for labor force? We're inadequately employed. If you look at the Department of Labor statistics, Latinos actually have a higher participation rate in the U.S. labor force of any group. That is, there's a higher percentage of Latinos either actively working or seeking work in the American labor force, but we're overrepresented in the service industry and underrepresented in the managerial. So our median income has stayed flat while inflation has gone up. There are more families living in the poverty level that are Latino. 50% of households in the lowest income quartile are Latinos. So what does that translate to with regard to our own family's ability to support our children's higher education? Today, it would take roughly 62% of a typical Latino family income to support one child in public higher education, 132% of our income to support one child in private education. So when you have the fastest growing segment of the American population exist as the most undereducated, inadequately employed, lower median income, less able to support our children's higher education dreams, we create this death spiral for the country. And so at the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, we exist for one reason. The reason we exist is to strengthen America by supporting Latino higher education. And we know that the only way to do that is to break that cycle of undereducation, inadequate employment, lower income, less able to support our own children's higher education dreams. What is the benefit to this country if we were to double the rate of Latinos earning their college degrees? If we were to double Latino college graduation rates, it would translate to $13 billion in public benefits, $5.4 billion in reduced program expenses for food stamps, for welfare, for Medicaid, $7.6 billion in increased tax revenues for the government, $13 billion in public benefit to this country, $14 billion in increased consumer spending by this segment of the American population, $27 billion in total if we double the rate of Latinos earning their college degrees. Of course, the question is, but what would it cost this country to educate them? $6 billion. It would take $6 billion to double the rate of Latinos, that is getting more Latinos to graduate high school college ready, start college, and be retained in colleges. So if you look at it from a public taxpayer, the return on investment is 2 to 1. The $13 billion that I mentioned, either in increased tax revenue or in reduced public expenditures over the cost of educating. But the societal return to investment is 4 to 1, the $27 billion versus the $6 billion cost of educating. Now, those of you that are business majors out there are saying, well, yes, but we spend the money today to educate Latinos and the savings are over a lifetime or the increased spending is over a lifetime. A 13-year payback, which is not a bad payback for this country. The question is, how do we do it? How do we break the cycle of undereducation in the Latino community? At HSF, when we adopted the mission to double the rate of Latinos earning a college degree, we knew we had to answer the what has to happen and the how will it happen. The what has to happen is consistent with what I said earlier. By and large, you can't just focus on Latinos who start college and get them to stay in school once they start. What they told us was, you're gonna have to get the pipeline so strong that you get Latinos to graduate from high school college ready, to start college and transition to a 4-year school, and to stay at a 4-year school at 85% the rate of non-Hispanic whites. That means increasing the high school graduation level of college-ready students from 56% to 73%. It means that it isn't a third of Latinos starting college, it's 42% of Latinos start college, and it isn't 57% of Latinos retaining, it's 62% of Latinos retaining. That's the only way for us to get at 18%, which is still behind the national average, but double where we were in 1996. So we know that we've got to focus on getting more Latinos into the college education pipeline by graduating high school college ready, starting college as soon as they graduate, and then staying in college once they start. So then you sit back and you say, well, there's the what. We know what we have to accomplish. How do we do it? And those of you that are in education know that there are a lot of studies out there that talk about what the problem is, but there are very few that tell you what solutions can be. So we went back and we said, you know, we've been giving scholarships since 1976, the first year that we awarded scholarships. What can our own scholars tell us about higher education? So we surveyed ourselves, a little nervous about what we would discover. 97% of my scholarship recipients were able to earn their baccalaureate. 43% went on to graduate school. 88% out-earned the national per capita median income, and almost 60%, 59.3%, earn at least double the Latino median income. Too soon to tell if we broke the cycle of undereducation as to whether their kids went on to college, but we used community service as a surrogate. 82% of them are active volunteers in their communities. So we knew that if we picked the students that overcame the academic and social obstacles and only lacked that financial hurdle, that if we invested in them, they would graduate, be meaningfully employed, contribute to their communities, and break that cycle that we described. Now you may say, well, these are kids that might have been the cream of the crop, they were destined for success. 41% of their fathers and 36% of their mothers didn't have a high school diploma. So in one generation, we went from non-high school diploma to college degree. So we asked them, what do you see as the obstacles and what do you see as the enablers? Because that gives us a roadmap on what you have to do, the how of how you solve for the what. The number one obstacle is financial. By a 3-to-1 reason, most kids said, I can, I'm ready, we don't have the family resources. But the number 2 reason that our kids couldn't go to college was responsibility towards their families or a family member. So we knew that we had to take the family into consideration. The third reason they mentioned to us was feeling different. I don't feel the same. And today we had a conversation around what is it like to be the one Latino that graduates from a majority Latino high school that goes into college versus being a minority Latino high school, but everybody goes to college. And there are some differences, and you can probably sense that. But the third thing that we have to fight was, how do we support Latinos and help prevent them from feeling different when they get to a college campus? The fourth reason was academic preparation, and the fifth reason was negative attitudes that they tend to think that people or other students have about them. So we knew that once we solved for the money, we had to worry about the family, we had to worry about their feeling different, their feeling inadequate with academic preparation, and negative attitudes that they felt was being expressed towards them. We turned the question around and said, but what do you view as support? Interestingly, and for those of you Latinos in the room, I think you'll agree with me on this, the number one enabler was a family member. So the family in the Latino culture becomes the number one obstacle, but also the number one enabler. So we knew we had to tackle the issue of family. But the second most important enabler was a relationship with a faculty member. The third was other Latino students around me. The fourth was having support services on campus. And the fifth was a Latino organization where it's safe for me to express myself. So we stepped back as an organization and we said, we know we have to close the gap between Hispanics and non-Hispanic whites by 85%. We know we have to do it at the graduating high school college ready. We know we have to do it at the transition to college, to the four-year school, and we know we have to do it to retain Latinos once they start school. We have to deal with issues around family, feeling different, academic preparation, and support systems. So at HSF, what we did was we went from a scholarship organization that only provided undergraduate scholarships for Latino students that were already in college to, in essence, two big pipelines. The first is, how do we get more Latinos in the college education pipeline? And we started with the parents. And we created a parental engagement program aimed at middle school parents to teach them what behaviors do you have to adopt in middle school so that your children know that college is an expectation, not an if. And what do you have to do on a daily basis to support your children with their education and understanding what it means to be on an academic track when you start high school? We went to general awareness programs and opened them up to entire families with dinner and with babysitting services in Spanish, in English, where we talk about what is an academic track, what is a vocational track, how do you pick a major, how do you pick a college, what resources are available to you regardless of your status in this country, regardless of your major, regardless of your family income situation, and how do we make it real to you by bringing students that you can identify with to hear these messages. We do workshops in the community where we take 9th graders, 10th graders, 11th graders, 12th graders, parents, and take them through a whole day's worth of workshops so that they understand, and when they leave, they have packages ready to go so that they can apply for programs for support. We also introduce scholarships for high school seniors to incent them to start college as soon as they graduate, for community college students, for community college transfer students, all aimed at getting more Latinos into the four-year college. And then at the four-year college, still supporting scholarship recipients, we launched an alumni mentoring network so that if you want to talk to somebody that is from your hometown, that is majoring in your field, that is working in the industry that you're curious about, or that is thinking about going back to graduate school, we can pair you up with somebody just like you to help you through your undergraduate experience. We created scholar chapters where we bring a lot of curriculum to students to help you in that support system and build it in that college. Last year, we awarded $25 million in scholarships, but we put 30,000 Latinos through our programming, plus their parents. And what we're trying to do now is just generate that pipeline so that we get more Latinos going through high school, knowing what the expectation is for college readiness, getting ready to start college, and then ultimately finishing. There are a lot of programs out there. We're partnering with Boys and Girls Club because there's so many Latinos that go to Boys and Girls Club. We're partnering with Big Brothers Big Sisters to give more Hispanic bigs so that we can have more Hispanic littles. We're looking at ways that we can increase the scale and scope of our work so that more Latinos see that college is possible for them, understand what resources are available to them, and more importantly, help parents feel a resource to their children versus someone who can't support their children's higher education dreams. the reason we work so hard on the family is at the end, when we ask my scholarship recipients, why are you so successful when so many others are not making it? They tell me, in my family, it wasn't if you go to college, it was when you go to college. And we're trying to create that college expectation as many families as we can. The reason we are so determined to work with this generation of students, and at lunch today we talked about the hopelessness that exists in many situations, in many communities. The reason we have such a heightened sense of urgency with this mission at my organization is this is the generation we can't afford to lose. If I look at the growth of Latinos, and my fellow panelists are going to give you some statistics in just a bit, I keep in mind just two numbers. Number one, between 1990 and 2000, when everybody was predicting this huge rise in the Latino population, everybody underestimated the actual growth that we had. But if I look at the 15 to 19-year-old demographic, that group in the United States grew by about 12%, and Latinos were about a third of that. It's slowing down with the aging of the baby boomers. So between 2000 and 2010, that same group is only growing by 9%, but Latinos are going to be 2/3 of that growth. In 2000, 1 out of every 10 high schoolers was Latino. By 2010, 1 out of every 5 high schooler is going to be a Latino. I'm sitting there thinking, if I think I have a huge client base today that I'm not getting to, it's only going to get bigger. But the biggest reason for my concern is, as much as we're growing, more of those children will be at risk. Speaking in a pragmatic way, the two biggest predictors of a child going on to college are family level of income and parental level of education. In this country today, if you look at households where both parents have less than a high school education, 1 out of 20 non-Hispanic white children find themselves in that kind of a household. 1 out of every 8 Asian children find themselves in that kind of a household. 1 out of every 6 African American children find themselves. 1 out of every 3 Latinos is living in a house where both parents have less than a high school education. And in the next 5 years, that number is going to grow by 20%, so that half of all children in the United States living in a household where both parents have less than a high school education will be Hispanic. Looking at income, today, 1 out of every 2 Hispanic children is in a house in the lowest income quartile, compared with 1 out of every 4 Asian Americans and 1 out of every 5 non-Hispanic whites. That number is going to grow by 25% in the next 5 years. I have more children at the high school level, more of them in households where both parents have less than a high school education, more of them living in lower income quartile homes where college is not affordable. We have a sense of urgency at the Hispanic Scholarship Fund to say, this is the generation this country cannot afford to miss. What can we do to make sure we embrace these children and make it a priority for America? I am grateful for your interest in being here tonight. I am hopeful for the questions that you ask, and most optimistic that the dialogue that we start today will be a dialogue that will be continued after I leave so that we can support Latinos in this geography. Thank you so very much for listening to my rants and raves, but I'm looking forward to your questions a little later on. Thank you very much.
Well, you just gave my speech about what the kids. But anyway, I just wanted to raise a few points, and my area of interest has always been the children in school, K-12. So I'm going to address that group. And I had just read the report on dropouts that the Department of Education in Massachusetts put out, and it's sort of depressing, especially if you are interested in Latino kids and children who have English as a second language. And I was going to report on that, and I decided I'm not going to report on that. I think the dilemma always is, if we focus on the bad news, it builds our sense of urgency of doing something about it, but also it sort of perpetuates a negative image of Latino kids. And I think, so that's always a tension, and I think it's important to see that we can indeed do things differently if we have the will to do it. So I'd like to talk more about what are the things that we should be paying attention that would help the children in the schools that Sarah was talking about, so that they can get ahead. I think before I start talking about that, one dilemma, one problem that exists in this country is, and if you heard the talk by the Suarez Orozcos a couple weeks ago, is that immigrant kids and language minority kids, of whom the majority are Latino kids, are in the two extremes of the economic continuum. So you have the very poor kids of families like you were describing, and then you have the children of very well-educated families. And what happens in schools is that they're compared. And they say, why if Pedrito could do it, whose father, is a professor of physics at Harvard, Juan cannot do it, whose father is cleaning the buildings, where Pedrito's father is teaching, So I think that's a problem right there. So what can education do to improve the schooling of Latino students? I think at the university level, we always talk about the schools, but I think we should talk about ourselves for a bit. I think we could do a better job in preparing teachers who can engage bilingual learners in their classrooms, and that can engage them regardless of the level of English language proficiency. And I think that's the biggest difficulty that I see out there, is if the children cannot fully communicate in English, then they are not engaged in the classroom because the teachers don't know, have difficulty on knowing how to do it. And so we need to prepare teachers, and then the schools need to look at the teachers that they have to see if they can do a better job at that. I think some of the things that could be done, and I think have shown that have helped students, is one is knowing the students, but knowing them as bilingual, bicultural, knowing them as learners, and knowing them as people. One of the things that I noticed, having come to this country as an adult, is that we have this feeling or this myth that people come from other countries here to forget who they are. And so we are not interested in who they are. We don't ask them questions about their language background or their country of origin. And I think it's important to be curious about those things and to know about that, what's the background of the children and who they are as bilingual, bicultural people, so that we treat them as bilingual, bicultural people. The only cases when people ask is if you have an accent. If you have an accent and your English is not too good, then they ask you where you're from. But if your English is fluent, and half of the bilingual kids in this country are born here, so their English is fluent, then you don't ask about their origin. So I'm always grateful that I have my accent, because with my looks, everybody thinks I'm gringa, and as soon as I open my mouth, they know I'm not. But it was interesting when we were having dinner earlier, and we were being introduced to Sarah, the first thing she asked, tell me about your background. That's the very kind of thing that we do always. Tell me where you come from and things like that. So ask about that. I walked into a classroom once. It was February, so that child had been in that classroom since September. And the teacher said, would you observe him? I'm concerned about him. And I am concerned about Juan or something, Torres or something like that was his name. And I asked her, where is he from? Well, I think he's Latin. And I was like, with that name? And so So I went and asked the kid, and he said, well, I'm Puerto Rican. So I was in that classroom for 5 minutes, and I knew where the kid came from, okay? But he had been in that classroom for several months, and the teacher didn't know where he came from. But, I'm not criticizing the teacher. It's a social context that where people here have been raised, in which is not conducive to be interested about who you are. And it's worse in New England, where people think that they are intruding. So that's sort of, it's a cultural issue. So the other thing is to know them as people. And that relates to the remark that Sarah said, that one of the obstacles is the responsibility towards the family. No, there is in research that Reese Moll reported. This young Latino woman, she was in 4th, 5th grade, who was a very good student and was involved in a lot of after-school programs. And then all of a sudden, she started skipping the after-school programs, and the teachers got very angry at her. Well, it turned out that she had to take the mom to the hospital, who was very sick and served as a translator. Well, you don't get angry at that child if you know about this issue of responsibility to the family, and that you know that that's going to come first in that culture. There's no question about that. So know them like that as people. The other is know them as learners and give them an identity in which they can feel capable. Many of the children, because are always judged with respect to a proficiency in English. And so if you're a fairly recent arrival, you look down because you're not proficient in English. So if you know the students, you can find ways of discovering their capabilities. And in one of the books that talks about bilingual learners, they report on this recent arrival Mexican girl who was very quiet, very withdrawn, and the teacher began to get close to her and then found out that she was an accomplished violinist. So she asked her to come and perform in her classroom. And as a result of that, the whole classroom changed the view of the child from seeing her as somebody who can't speak English to seeing her as an accomplished violinist. You see, but all of that took getting to know your learner. And the teacher didn't know any Spanish, but she knew that she had to know her learners. Another thing that I think is important, and you mentioned that you had discussed that a lot with our undergraduates, is helping the children to build an integrated identity. That's a major issue. Who are you? I remember my daughter when she was married to an American, and I raised my daughter one parent, one language. And when she was 3, she asked me, "Am I more Spanish than English?" And then she said, "Oh, I'm more Spanish because my mom is Spanish." And I was like, yay. I'm not sure my husband was celebrating as much, but anyway. So what's that integrated? How do you build that integrated identity? And you need to build it. They need to respect their heritage, but also feel that they can adjust and they can be part of the host culture, not feel separated from the host culture. So they have to have also an identity as Latinos in the US, and they also need to develop an identity as successful students. There is an underlying rumor there that if you are a successful student, then you're doing something to your identity as Latino or as a child of color, and that's not a good for the students. They also have to develop an identity in which they can, that includes all of the knowledge and skills to be able to use multiple languages and to not be afraid of using their heritage language, not to be afraid of using English. And when it comes to English, they have to be able to use the register of English that you use with your friends, but also the register of English that the society holds as necessary for upward mobility. And they have to feel that they can do that. And there's a wonderful book by Portes and Rumbaud that it's a study on second generation. And one of the things that they show there is that those communities that maintain their bilingualism are the communities in which the families are most kept intact, because the authority of the parents is not lost, because the parents can, if they are more fluent in Spanish, they can communicate with the children in Spanish and they can show authority and the kids can understand it. Otherwise, when there is a disparity, is when the family starts, the relationships in the family start breaking up. There's also lots of research on bilingualism that show that bilingualism is an advantage, but we do everything possible in this country to eradicate the languages of the children. The other thing is that the research on schooling reveals that you need the register of English that is accepted in schooling. And I'm going to give you an interesting anecdote of what happened to one of my students when he was doing practice teaching and was doing a project for my class. And he was working with this Dominican girl, high school, and the girl said, "I want to improve my writing." And indeed, the girl was quite fluent in writing English, but it was English that it looked like oral language. It looked like informal oral language, her writing. So I suggested that he uses a strategy that is very based on second language acquisition research that is called reformulation, in which you take something, a writing from a student, and you rewrite it as a native speaker would. And then you have the student compare the two and discuss. And in this case, my students rewrote it in this academic language that this kid was sort of asking that that's what she wanted. She took one look at the rewrite that my student gave her, and she said, "Oh, that's the language of rich people," and she dismissed it, okay? So we need to develop in kids an identity in which they say, yes, I can own that language too. It's not the language of others, it's my language too. So in other words, we need to develop curriculum and instruction that includes those things. That includes deep knowledge of the students and includes building the kind of identity that is going to make them successful. Thanks.
Thanks, Maria. I'd like to talk tonight just very, very generally about going to college. And I want to state up front that what I want to say about the relationship between Latino population growth, environment and context of education, and growing up Latino in the United States in all of its complexity, and I think I'll probably underscore that more than anything today, is I think one of the issues that we have is the homogenization of Latino populations in the United States, that we have a very good idea, or at least some very good predictions about how to think about subgroups within Latino communities in the United States. For the most part, certainly in the sort of colloquial press, in the sort of CNN reports, we seem to think that the Latinization of the United States looks like one thing. And that becomes problematic when we think about education. I want to talk a little bit about college attainment risk factors and college-going attributes of Latino students. And I want to tie that into the issue of employment. As someone who really thinks a lot about theory and educational practice and more about democratic ethics than I probably should, you can never do enough theory, though. The economic argument is a very, very powerful one. In fact, because anything that I say about the relationship between multiple dimensions of Latino education and Latino environmental context, you could say exactly the same thing about anybody else. No one goes to college in the United States without a lot of things being in place. So the question comes up when we think about Latino populations is, what does make them special in this great complexity? Population and the dimensions of population are one of the things that make us very peculiar right now in the United States. Bill's done up some nice data for us. And one of the things I want you to think about is what Sara has suggested to us, that this is a relatively young population. And if we think in economic terms, that's going to suggest to us that, well, what is going to be the impact of that now young generation of Latino students, and also the new wave of immigration from Central America in particular, and the educational characteristics of those new immigrants, what impact will that have at the longer tail end of their workforce life? In particular, for example, I've been on panels where we've talked about the impact of this Latino population really affecting Social Security. And to what effect will these large numbers of low-level, low-wage income earners now have on public health benefits later on? I want you to also think about this population as being impacted by what we in education have long been pretty mad about, for lack of a more sophisticated way of saying it, and that's the environmental context of disenfranchised populations. One of the things that we know about Latino populations that we can say very generally is that we're highly concentrated in metropolitan areas, which is a really nice way of saying that it probably means that they're in poorer urban school districts. And the reality is that that's very, very true. And thus, that means just very easily that we can understand and appreciate the effect of poverty on these populations, and especially with regard to how it is that we're going to measure and take a look at educational attainment. As someone who does higher education, I'm always very clear that in my own head, and certainly to my students and others, that in order to think about, because my goal is to Latinize the academy. My people will take over. Yay. Yeah, come on, you can do it. We're taking a look at populations that are involved in intensely segregated school systems, and we all know the correlation factors that come out of that with regard to educational performance. We know that that retaining in grades is a Latino phenomenon. We know that the number of Latino students get retained at a much higher rate than any and all other ethnic groups. And we know that once you're retained one grade, that has a series of consequences on forward. We also know about gatekeeping courses. We can tell you for a fact, and you can slink in your seats if you are one of these people who shied away from pre-calculus and calculus. And if you're a member of the Latino community, my guess is that 50% of you didn't take pre-calculus and calculus because we don't. Now, we either don't because our schools don't offer it or because we're not in the pipeline. This isn't about sort of the victimization issue, but the fact is that we have a real case of gatekeeping courses that then eventually will really bring to the Hispanic Scholarship Fund a very small number of students knocking on their doors for money, because in fact, academic preparation at K-12 is an absolutely critical issue for college attainment. And we'll talk a little bit about that right now. On average, what we have in Latino populations and this is just absolutely stunning, is that all of the risk factors that we can identify that can predict low college attainment rates sit squarely in the Latino community. Non-college parents, low family income, sibling dropouts, being retained a grade, having GPAs of around C or C+, bearing children in high school. And I should also add right now, and I'll make a point about this in a little bit, is that the Latino educational attainment landscape is a very gendered one. And there's some data for you here that will let you take a look at it as a gendered phenomenon. It's also very much a gendered phenomenon with regard to Latinos in the academy and in graduate education as well. And the curricular preparation. You really almost couldn't have more risk factors, very seriously so. If we think about this in the context of being schooled in intensely segregated schools in metropolitan areas where we have the absence of health care and crumbling infrastructure, this should not be a surprise to us. That's what goes on. So when I take a look at college attainment and the disparities between Latino groups, Latino men and Latinas, and I take a look in comparisons between African American cohorts and Asian American cohorts across the diversity of groups, because in fact, that's one of the things that most stymies us in this kind of higher education work, is trying to take a look at what differences immigration pattern, type of immigration pattern, native born, non-native born, bilingual, English as first language, not first language. We see a bit of a spread in these risk factors, but we still coalesce in that real tough, tight middle. So much so that if we didn't really know much about higher education, you would be able to predict where Latino students go to college, how long they stay, and what degrees they earn, because it will be pretty obvious to you. Most of us are concentrated at the two-year community college level, and our rate of baccalaureate completion is about a 6% rate, because in fact, one of the things we know is that most of us tend to go to college part-time at the two-year college level, and those are two key negative predictors of baccalaureate attainment. The more you go to school part-time, you're more likely to not finish a baccalaureate. You're more or less, let me take it back. You are more likely to barely complete the associate's degree and certainly not likely to attain a baccalaureate degree. So when those of us who want to Latinize the academy start looking at these data, one of the things that becomes very, very clear to us is that there's nobody coming up to join us, because if we do get baccalaureates, it's also then even a slimmer. English is my second language. It is. You may not realize that. It's a very, very, very low number of Latinos who actually move on to the doctoral degree and then move into the academy. I'll talk about that in a second. If we are likely to attend part-time, and 52% of us do attend part-time, we also take much longer to complete degrees. In fact, because all of the variables that Sara talked about with regard to the responsibility factors that Latino students have, they all work in college, they all have family responsibilities. You know, we have these really gross generalizations. The data bear it out. The data tell us that our longer time to degrees is a function of money and outside of school responsibilities across all Latino demographic groups, regardless of generation of immigration. They'll bear it out. Most of us, over 80% of us, have applied for financial aid, and 63% of us will get financial aid. And I want to make this point, especially because we have someone for the Hispanic Scholarship Fund. What we're also looking at is a phenomenon of funding higher education that has shifted to the private sector away from the public sector. In other words, government has shifted its funding priorities, especially to lower income students, and put the burden on the private sector. So the private sector is asked to do more work. And in fact, since 1980, we can take a look at the trend away from grant and aid to middle and lower income families, which most Latino kids come from, to loan. So we've now got about a 65% loan rate to 35% grant and aid, when in 1980 it was very much the exact opposite. And we know trend data tell us that lower income families shy away from loans, both as cultural factors and accessibility to loan and loan data. So that we've placed the burden now on the private sector, philanthropic sector, to actually fund low-income college going, and taking it out of the hands of the federal government, and thus shifting the burden of the public good onto the private sector. Clear, one is the issue of language. To what extent, especially within region, do school districts involve parents in a functional linguistic way? You know, translation, I mean, this is sort of commonsensical. Are even pamphlets, et cetera, and talks given in both languages? And then the second issue is the fact that for many communities that meant addressing families at a different educational level than schools had anticipated, because when you have newly immigrant groups with lower formal educational levels in their home countries, so if we were to say 6th grade reading level here, let's say, what much of this was suggesting is that parental involvement required the kind of linguistic level that these folks couldn't get in either language. So you had multiple problems. This rang very true for me because in a program that I participated in the Midwest with Mexicano immigrant groups, they're primarily migrant workers, and working with parents and parents with the schools, that was made very clear to me the first night, that it wasn't just, yes, I can translate back and forth in English and Spanish. It was, okay, wait a minute, some folks can't read in Spanish either, and parents want information in a particular way but weren't given the information in a particular way. And we were at the mercy of particular superintendents and principals and their openness to do this kind of work and get parents involved in a very meaningful way, which to me meant that when you asked them, did they understand you?
But some of the parent involvement is a little bit hypocritical. I had a personal experience. I worked for a long time in Chelsea, which is about 80% Hispanic. And I would go to meetings with the parents, and the parents would talk about what they wanted for the children, and I would just take notes and then rewrite those notes and support it by the literature, and then I would bring it back to them and say, you know, this is what you want, and this is the literature that supports what you want, but I would put it in kind of academic language. So I did that for several weeks until we put together this document, and which then I translated, and then 70 parents showed up in the superintendent's office and said, this is what we want, and the research says this and that, and whatever. And I was literally thrown out of the town, and the school system never, ever wanted me around again. Because I had educated the parents, and the parents I gave them the words that they needed to say what they wanted to say to begin with. So, I mean, so first they were complaining about not involvement of parents, but when you facilitate that, they get angry. So it's very hypocritical, I think.
But to Anna's point, there is a dilemma because of home country, and I haven't met a parent yet that doesn't understand that education is the key to a better life. The problem is they don't understand how much education. And so I mentioned this at dinner, and I mentioned this at lunch today. Many parents tell me, well, when I ask them, how much education do you think is enough? Because, of course, I'm out there with a college message. I've heard parents say, well, if they get a job that pays more than I earn, they must have enough education. And then you have to explain education versus cost of living, or inflation versus cost of living. And then because so many parents are hourly workers in this country that don't have benefits, if their children get jobs that pay the same but have benefits, they think, well, they must have enough education. So first is helping them understand American education and the American economy and work. The second thing is there is a quiet orgullo, there is a dignity about being a Latino parent. And it is tough for a parent not to have answers. And in fact, my husband and I laugh all the time. He said, I still remember the first time I asked my mom a question. She said, I don't know. And it was like, how can you not know? Mom's supposed to know everything. Well, it's even worse when you don't know American education, when you don't know what to advocate for, when you don't know about testing or tracks. And many times we hear back at the end of our sessions from a father, and I can't even begin to tell you what it feels like to have a father come up to you and say in Spanish, thank you for helping me without taking away my dignity in front of my child. So many parents just don't know how to be resources for their children, and there isn't a safe place. And so I value what you do. But your question to me about what we can do and why I'm so frustrated, I think if I were to boil it all down, whether it's because it's whatever I hear from potential funders or people about this issue, I am concerned that in this country today there is more of a scarcity mentality than an abundance, which means a gain for one group comes at the expense of another group. And by and large, my biggest frustration is that when I talk about a gain for my kids, many people still see it as at the expense of someone else. And whether it's teachers groups or parents groups complaining about diversity or lessening of, I am concerned, and I'm so grateful that I married a man who was probably the only graduate student at Stanford that was signing up for freshman Spanish because he was so excited that he married a Latina and could learn a new culture. And there is so much that we can learn from each other, and to the extent that you made advocates of a group of parents, or to the extent that you've got somebody doing a dissertation in an area that matters to us, there's just so much joy for me in the discovery of work, but yet so many people see it as a threat, and that's a frustration for me.
Well, at this stage, we would have time just for one more question. Well, two. Okay, two more questions. Please go ahead. Microphone.
Just a couple of questions, quick questions. Most of the conversation has circled around high school education and kids who go to college. My question to you, Dr. Martinez-Tucker, what percentage of the funds or resources from your foundation go into adults, Hispanic adults, who either have migrated from Latin America or have returned to school after years and years and years of work? And the second question is, I think that you said that 30,000 kids are reached out by your foundation, and you only have $30 million. So what do you do with $1,000 per kid?
No. Let me do it another way. 30,000 children participated in my outreach programs, and their parents along with them. They just learned from our outreach. 5,000 children got $25 million in scholarships, and some children got scholarships as low as $250. Some children got scholarships as high as $56,000, depending on their family situation. So 5,000 students got $25 million in scholarships, and 30,000 students, I used $5 million to cover the cost of delivering programs and creating workbooks for the families and preparation materials, roadmaps, et cetera. So that's that. Let me step back a little bit. If I look at the demographics of my scholarship recipients, I would say, let me cut it two different ways for you. Actually, let me cut it three different ways for you. Let's just say that my last year, 25 million, about 5 million went to what I would call pipeline Latinos, graduating high school seniors, starting college, community college, or community college transfer. About 17 million went to undergraduates, and then the rest, 3 million, went to graduate students. So that's one cut. A second cut would be roughly 15% went to what we call the undocumented, and of the other 85%, the other 85%, roughly 60% went to permanent residents and 40% went to U.S. citizens. So that's the demographics. If I look at age, if I take out the graduate students and just look at the traditional four-year baccalaureate, I would say that about 70% was what I would consider a traditional student, the 18 to 25-year-old, and the rest of it was the adult student returning to college.
Mariela?
There was mention, first of all, thank you
mentioned this earlier today. We know that if you're not hooked on math or science between the 3rd and 5th grade, you're not going to persist through college. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, you can't be everything to all, and so my focus really is the 15 to 18-year-old and their parents and getting them in the pipeline. The research that we've done, though, our students have told us what programs have either kept them in school or gotten them academically stronger for college, and what we've done is created strategic alliances. They may be called Puente programs, they may be called Mesa programs, they may be called Summer Bridge programs. What we do is we line up with them, ask them to do the intervention for the academics, and then guarantee scholarships to their recipients. Because if I were to get into the academic, then that would be a drain away from my $30 million that I don't have right now until I can find additional sources of income.
Well, I think certainly our conversation today, and I hope for all of us, helps us to think about the Lynch School, to think about our priorities. Certainly one thing that we heard time and time again were data that really help to, I suppose, challenge myths and stereotypes and to have us face the situation as it really is. And so certainly I think the kind of research that we do, the kind of data we collect, the kind of reasoned arguments that are evidence-based are very important. Also, certainly our outreach, I think we know very much that we can't do this work in isolation from families and from people who work with families, from counselors and social workers, and especially, certainly with the schools, Maria's work with teachers, with people who have experience in student life and universities. So certainly outreach and partnership is so much part of what will help us understand what we really need to look at carefully, what kind of data we really do need to collect, and to do that in collaboration. And then finally, concerns of equity and opportunity for people, how will that shape our curriculum? And I hope that, I think it's crucial for us time and time again to try to look at the familiar way we do things with new eyes. And so I hope that certainly these issues will not be out of our consciousness in 5 minutes, but will certainly help us continue to improve and certainly help us also then find the resources and funding to do this important work to address these crucial issues. When Sarah came for commencement, she was saying how she had left University of Texas at Austin, where she was commencement speaker. So at the commencement there, where it was 104 degrees, and she arrived here. And if any of you remember when it was 47 degrees in Alumni Stadium, she arrives today, and it's very cold, and right now it's quite cold here. So I want to assure her that we do have warm weather in Boston, so certainly you've got to come back, certainly to experience the warm weather, no doubt about that. But let me, on behalf of all of us, thank you, thank our faculty respondents. I think it's been a great conversation, and we are all very grateful.